It was almost 10:45 on a Thursday night when I turned onto Oak Ridge Lane, quiet, empty, the kind of street where porch lights flicker and every sound carries farther than it should. I wasn't planning to stop. I was only driving by my daughter-in-law Clara's place to drop off a folder Ethan had forgotten before flying out to Denver that morning. He'd asked if I could leave it by the door so she could send it to his office in the morning. A simple errand. 10 minutes, I told myself. Then home, bed, and another lonely night waiting for my wife, Linda, to get back from book club. But as I slowed near Clara's house, my headlights caught something that didn't make sense. Parked halfway behind the hedges near the garage was a familiar silver Camry, my wife's car. The same one she'd said she was taking to her sister's for the evening. My foot hovered over the brake. For a moment, I thought maybe I was mistaken, maybe Clara had borrowed it. But the plates were unmistakable, and the engine was still warm. I pulled over a few houses down, switched off my lights, and sat there with my heart thudding in my chest. The entire house was dark except for a faint glow from the living room window. Curtains drawn, but not completely, just enough for a thin sliver of light to leak through. I told myself it was innocent. Maybe Linda had stopped by to check on Clara. Maybe one of them wasn't feeling well. But if that were true, why the secrecy? Why park in the shadows? I stepped out of my truck, the night air cutting cold through my jacket. Every step toward that house felt heavier, like wading into deep water. When I reached the porch, I froze. Through the silence, I could hear faint laughter, two voices, both female. One of them was Linda's. Soft, intimate, unmistakable. I crept closer to the side window, pulse hammering in my throat. The laughter faded into whispers, then quiet moans. My knees trembled. My world began to tilt. Nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared me for what I was about to see inside that house. Before I tell you what I saw that night, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening from, because what happened next could happen in any family. My name is Harold Benton, 66 years old, retired building contractor, and, until that night, I thought I understood my life better than most men my age. I'd spent 4 decades working with my hands, building homes for other families, proud of the one I'd built for my own. My wife, Linda, was my anchor, my laughter after long days, my reason to slow down once the last mortgage was paid. We'd been married 34 years, raised one son, Ethan, who became everything I'd ever hoped for, a bright, decent man with his mother's kindness and my stubborn streak. When Ethan married Clara 5 years ago, I felt like life had finally come full circle. She was gentle, always smiling, and quick to help. A nurse by profession, she treated everyone around her like a patient she wanted to heal. I was grateful my son had found a woman who loved him that way. Our Sundays were sacred, family dinners at my place, roast chicken, laughter around the table, and Linda humming old love songs while washing dishes. But about 6 months before that night, something started to shift, quietly at first, like a draft through a closed window. Linda began spending more time away from home, usually with a ready excuse, her sister's errands, volunteer meetings, late book club nights that left her smelling faintly of someone else's perfume. Clara, too, grew more distant. She stopped calling me Dad and started saying Mr. Benton, as though formality could hide discomfort. I remember one Sunday when Ethan was away on a business trip. Linda suggested we cancel dinner, said Clara wasn't feeling well. Later that evening, I saw Linda's car parked outside Clara's house when I drove by on my way to the hardware store. I told myself it was just compassion, Linda being there for our daughter-in-law. But I couldn't shake the unease. Then there were the whispered phone calls late at night. I'd wake up to the soft murmur of Linda's voice in the hallway, words I couldn't quite catch. When I asked, she'd smile and say, "You worry too much, Harold. It's just church committee stuff." Church committees didn't meet at midnight. Still, I tried to trust her. At 66, you want to believe that a long marriage means something, that the woman who held your hand through surgeries and family funerals couldn't be keeping secrets from you. I'd built my whole life around that belief. But the distance grew thicker between us, unspoken tension at breakfast, polite smiles replacing real conversation. It wasn't just suspicion that hurt. It was the silence. The way she'd glance at her phone and quickly flip it face down. The way Clara stopped visiting unless Ethan was home. I told myself it was all in my head, that old age was making me paranoid. But the truth is, deep down, I already knew something was wrong. I just didn't want to name it. That night, seeing her car outside Clara's house, wasn't the beginning. It was the confirmation of every small betrayal I'd ignored for months. The pieces had been there all along, the lies, the laughter that wasn't for me anymore, the growing emptiness in a house that used to feel alive. I used to think the worst pain a man could feel was losing someone he loved. I was wrong. The real pain is realizing they're still alive, but already gone. And I was about to learn just how far gone Linda truly was. I crept closer to the window, each step heavy with dread. The light inside was dim, soft, golden, almost romantic. Through the narrow gap between the curtains, I caught sight of them. My wife, Linda, sat on the couch, her legs crossed, a glass of wine in her hand. She looked younger somehow. Hair down, laughter lighting up her face in a way I hadn't seen in years. Across from her sat Clara, my daughter-in-law, her posture relaxed, one hand resting far too casually on Linda's knee. At first, I told myself it was nothing. Maybe they were comforting each other, maybe Clara was upset and Linda was consoling her. But as I watched, their laughter softened into whispers, and then Clara leaned forward. Their foreheads touched. Linda's hand came up, brushing Clara's cheek with the kind of tenderness that used to belong to me. Then, right there on my son's couch, my wife kissed her. My stomach dropped. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. It felt like the air had been ripped from my lungs. 34 years of marriage, gone in the span of a heartbeat. My first instinct was to burst through the door, to scream, to demand an explanation, but something in me froze. A deeper instinct told me to stay silent, to watch. I fumbled for my phone and hit record, hands trembling so badly I nearly dropped it. Through the speaker, I heard fragments of their conversation, muffled but enough to burn into my memory forever. "Ethan can never know," Linda whispered. "He won't," Clara replied softly. "He trusts both of us too much." "And Harold?" Linda asked, her tone cautious. "He's too old to suspect anything," Clara said, with a laugh that cut deeper than any knife. "He just wants peace. He won't see what's right in front of him." They both laughed again. I stumbled back from the window, shaking. I wanted to vomit. To scream. To wake up and find it was all a nightmare. But the voices kept replaying in my head, my wife mocking my age, my daughter-in-law betraying my son, both of them spinning a web of deceit right under our roof. Driving home, I could barely hold the steering wheel. My vision blurred with tears and rage. Every mile felt heavier, every second louder with the echo of their laughter. I pulled into my driveway and sat there in the dark, gripping the wheel until my knuckles went white. The house in front of me, our house, suddenly looked like a stranger's. When Linda came home hours later, I was still awake. I asked how book club went. She smiled, kissed my forehead, and said, "Lovely. We discussed the bridges of Madison County. You'd have hated it." That was the moment I realized how effortlessly she could lie to me. There was no hesitation, no flicker of guilt. Just smooth deceit wrapped in a smile I once trusted with my life. I stared at her for a long time, trying to reconcile the woman in front of me with the one I'd seen at Clara's house. They were the same, yet not. One had built a home beside me for decades, the other had just torn it apart for a thrill. That night, sleep wouldn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them together, Linda's hand on Clara's knee, that secretive smile. My mind spiraled through every memory, every family dinner, every time they'd shared a laugh at the table while Ethan and I exchanged glances, oblivious. How many times had they stolen moments under our noses? When dawn broke, I sat at the kitchen table staring at my wedding photo, Linda in her ivory dress, smiling at me like I was her whole world. I thought about the vows we'd made, the life we'd built, the trust I'd given freely. And then I thought about my son. How could I ever tell him that his wife, the woman he adored, was sleeping with his mother? How could I destroy his world the way mine had just been destroyed? I poured myself a glass of whiskey and watched the light creep across the floor, the sun rising on a reality I didn't want to face. My heart ached not just for myself but for the innocent man who'd soon learn that both the women he loved most had been lying to him. That morning, something in me hardened. I didn't know what I'd do next, but one thing was certain, I wasn't going to let this betrayal stay buried. The truth had to come out, no matter what it cost. The next morning, the house felt colder than usual. The ticking of the kitchen clock seemed louder, the smell of Linda's coffee sharper, almost mocking. She hummed quietly while frying eggs, wearing that same blue robe she'd had for years, like nothing had changed. I sat across from her at the table, forcing myself to eat while my stomach twisted. Every time she looked at me, I saw the woman from the window, not the wife I'd grown old with. I wanted to shout at her, to tell her I'd seen everything, but fear stopped me. Fear of hearing her confirm it. Fear of what that truth would do to me, to Ethan, to what little was left of our family. So, I swallowed my anger with my breakfast and pretended everything was fine. She asked if I was feeling all right. I said I hadn't slept much, and she smiled, patting my hand like she used to when I had long days on the job. That touch, so casual, so familiar, made my skin crawl. After she left, for errands, I sat alone in the quiet kitchen and tried to make sense of what I'd seen. Maybe there was some explanation. Maybe it wasn't what it looked like. Maybe the kiss was innocent, some emotional misunderstanding between two lonely women. My mind twisted itself into excuses, desperate to avoid the truth. But denial has a short shelf life. The more I tried to justify it, the more the facts turned against me. Linda's late nights. Clara's sudden distance. The phone calls that ended when I entered the room. The laughter that used to fill our home now lived somewhere else, between them. By afternoon, I couldn't sit still. I drove aimlessly through town, retracing years of our life together. The diner where Linda and I had our first breakfast as newlyweds. The church where Ethan was baptized. Every place held memories of love I thought was unshakable. Now, each one felt like a cruel joke. That night, she came home later than usual. I asked how her sister was. She didn't blink. "Fine," she said, hanging her coat. "We had dinner and watched one of those old romantic comedies you hate." Her lies flowed smoother than ever. I nodded, pretending to believe her, and she smiled, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. When she kissed my cheek goodnight, I smelled the faint trace of Clara's perfume, the same scent she'd worn at Christmas dinner last year. It wasn't on Linda's coat before. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I replayed that moment by the window, Clara's hand, Linda's laugh, their voices calling my name like I was too old, too blind to notice. The next morning, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, studying the man staring back. Wrinkles, gray hair, tired eyes, signs of age I'd once worn with quiet pride. But now they felt like proof of weakness. Maybe Clara was right. Maybe I was too old to see what was happening under my nose. Maybe Linda saw me the same way, just a fading old man, easy to deceive. But as I looked into my reflection, something hardened inside me. I wasn't blind. I wasn't finished. I'd built an entire life from nothing once before, and I'd do it again if I had to. I just needed the truth, all of it. That day, I decided I wouldn't confront Linda until I had proof she couldn't deny. Whatever game she and Clara were playing, it was time I learned the rules. Before leaving for town, she leaned in the doorway and said, "Don't forget, Ethan's flying back next week. Maybe we can all have dinner together." I nodded slowly. "Yeah," I said, my voice steady but my heart breaking. "Dinner sounds good." She smiled and walked out, the door closing softly behind her. I waited until her car disappeared down the street, then turned off the coffee pot and sat in silence. If she wanted to play house with lies, I'd play along, for now. But from that day forward, I wasn't her husband in love. I was a man gathering evidence. And before long, I'd uncover something far darker than I could ever imagine. The morning after that silent decision, I drove straight to my old friend and accountant, Raj Patel. Raj had managed my finances for nearly 20 years, steady, discreet, and loyal. He was one of the few people I could still trust. I told him I needed a quick review of my joint accounts, pretending it was just part of my end-of-year planning. He gave me a puzzled look. "You've never asked for that level of detail before, Harold. Everything all right?" I smiled faintly. "Just tying up loose ends, Raj." Humor an old man. When he pulled up the records, the first thing that caught my eye was the activity. A few large transfers, quiet, regular, moving from our savings into a fund I'd never heard of. It was listed under a name that made my blood run cold, C. Benton Trust. My daughter-in-law's initials. I kept my expression calm, but inside, everything twisted. "Can you tell me where that money's going?" I asked. Raj frowned, clicked through a few screens. "Looks like it's an investment account. Jointly managed by Linda Benton and Clara Benton. Authorized by you last year, see?" He slid a document across the desk with my digital signature on it. But I had never signed anything like that in my life. "Someone forged this," I said, voice trembling but steady. "Can you print me copies of every transfer, every document tied to that account?" He nodded without asking further questions. I left his office with a thick folder and a heavier heart. By the time I got back to my truck, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely start the engine. Back home, I spread the papers across my desk. Dozens of transactions over 6 months, each carefully spaced to avoid suspicion. The total? Just over $1.3 million. Our retirement savings. My life's work. Gone. It wasn't just infidelity anymore. This was theft. A betrayal calculated down to the dollar. That night, I couldn't look at Linda without seeing the balance sheets flashing in my head. She noticed my silence but didn't ask. Maybe she assumed I'd stopped suspecting. Maybe she was too confident in her lies. Either way, I played along. 2 days later, I contacted an old client, Manny Torres, a former police detective turned private investigator. He owed me a favor from years ago when I helped him renovate his brother's house at cost. I met him at a diner on the edge of town and slid him the folder. "I need you to find out what my wife and daughter-in-law are doing with this," I said. He flipped through the papers, whistled low. "You sure you want to know? This looks ugly already." "I've lived too long to hide from ugly," I replied. "Just get me the truth." Over the next 2 weeks, Manny worked quietly. He planted small GPS trackers on Linda's car and phone, monitored her call records, and staked out her meetings. Every few days, he'd send me a brief update, nothing concrete yet, just patterns. Then one Friday evening, he called me with a tone that chilled me. "Harold, you might want to sit down." He explained that Linda and Clara had been meeting with a man named Victor Lane, a financial advisor with a history of fraud cases. They met him 3 times at a hotel cafe, always under different names. Manny had photos, grainy but clear enough. Linda and Clara, heads bent over documents, smiling, signing papers. "They're planning something," Manny said. "Not just stealing. They're setting up legal structures, trusts, accounts. Could be a transfer of ownership, maybe even your estate." My chest tightened. My will, my company shares, my insurance, all of it was still under joint review with Linda. I'd never imagined she'd weaponize my trust. When Manny delivered the photos and transcripts, I stared at them for hours. Every smile looked like a knife, every handshake a nail in my coffin. I started keeping my own notes, dates, times, bank alerts. I installed hidden cameras in the study, changed the password on my email, and moved small amounts of money into a private account Ethan didn't even know about. I was building a case, not just for revenge, but for survival. Then came the final straw. While reviewing the copies from Raj's office, I found a new policy document dated just 3 weeks earlier, a life insurance amendment. The beneficiary section had been changed. Where it once read Linda Benton, spouse, it now read Linda and Clara Benton, joint survivorship. That detail snapped something inside me. This wasn't about love or money anymore. They were planning something far worse. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling as the realization settled over me like frost. They weren't just taking my money. They were setting the stage for my death. The laughter from that night at Clara's house came back to me, clearer than ever. I could almost hear their voices, sweet, calm, rehearsed. They thought I was old. They thought I was slow. They had no idea the man they were plotting against had just declared war in silence. The next move would be mine. A week after discovering the insurance change, I got a call from Manny just after midnight. His voice was low, urgent. "Harold, we've got something. You're going to want to hear this in person." We met the next morning in his car, parked behind the old lumber yard, neutral ground, private, quiet. He handed me a flash drive and said, "It's all there. Audio and video. You might want to brace yourself before you listen." Back home, I plugged the drive into my laptop and hit play. The screen flickered, showing grainy footage from a hidden camera Manny had placed at the hotel cafe. Linda and Clara sat across from Victor Lane, the fraud advisor. Their voices were clear enough to slice through the static. "Clara, he takes those pills for his heart every morning, right?" Linda, "Yes, but I can swap them. He wouldn't notice." Victor, "Don't get sloppy. The insurance has a contestability period. Make it look natural." Clara, "He's always alone in his workshop. One wrong wire, and it'll look like an accident." I froze. My throat went dry. The room seemed to tilt around me. My wife and daughter-in-law, women I'd loved, trusted, fed, and protected, were planning my death. I rewound the footage again and again, hoping I'd misunderstood. But the words stayed the same. Cold. Clinical. Planned. Later in the same video, Linda leaned closer to Clara and whispered, "Once it's done, we'll split the payout. You'll take your share, disappear for a while. I'll handle the rest." Clara smiled, like they were talking about a vacation, not a murder. For the first time in my life, I felt fear, not the kind that comes from danger, but the kind that comes from knowing the enemy lives in your own home. That night, Linda cooked dinner as usual. I watched her move around the kitchen, graceful, humming softly. She looked at me and smiled. That smile. I could almost see the monster behind it now. I forced myself to eat, keeping my composure while every instinct screamed to run. After dinner, she handed me my pills, as she always did. This time, I held them in my palm and pretended to swallow, slipping them into my pocket when she turned away. Later, when I checked, the capsules looked the same, but the powder inside had a faint chemical odor, bitter and metallic. It wasn't imagination anymore. She was testing the plan. The next morning, I called Judge Lopez, an old friend from the Rotary Club, now retired but still sharp as ever. I told him everything, slowly, carefully, without emotion. At first, he thought I was exaggerating. Then I showed him the footage. He leaned back in his chair, face pale. "You can't confront them yet," he said. "If they're planning to act, you need more than this. You need timing, intent, proof of financial motive. Let me make some calls. Lopez connected me with a detective he trusted, one willing to quietly monitor the situation without alerting Linda or Clara. Meanwhile, he advised me to behave normally. Pretend nothing had changed. Those next few days were the longest of my life. I woke each morning pretending not to know my wife wanted me dead. I smiled at her jokes, let her kiss my cheek, and even complimented her cooking while secretly dumping my food into the trash when she wasn't looking. At night, I barely slept. I kept the recordings on a flash drive inside the lining of my tool bag, right under the hammer I'd used to build our first home. Every creak of the floorboards, every sound from the hallway made my pulse quicken. Manny stayed on the case, following Clara after her shifts at the hospital. One evening, he called me again, voice tight. She met with Victor. Cash handoff this time. Looks like she's paying him for something big. 2 days later, the detective Lopez had referred came to my house posing as an insurance auditor. Linda greeted him politely, even offered coffee. He scanned the property, taking discreet photos of the circuit box, the workshop wiring, and the kitchen, exactly the places Clara had mentioned in the recording. When he left, he said quietly, "You're lucky you called early." They were close to setting something up. Very close. That night, I sat in my workshop, surrounded by the smell of sawdust and oil, thinking about the irony. I had built this house with my hands, every wall, every shelf, every joint. Now, the people I'd built it for were plotting to use it as my coffin. As I stared at the wooden beams above, I made myself a promise: I wasn't going to die here, not like this. They'd chosen the wrong man to deceive. So, I made my move. The next day, I quietly transferred what was left of our shared savings into a private trust under Ethan's name. I didn't tell him yet, but I wanted him protected. I contacted the insurance company myself, flagged the policy for beneficiary verification, and froze the payouts. Then I called Manny. "We're done gathering evidence," I said. "Now, we make them show their hand." He didn't ask how. He just nodded and said, "Tell me when." Because if Linda and Clara thought they were planning my end, they hadn't seen how far I was willing to go for justice. And by the time they realized the game had changed, it would already be too late. The morning after my meeting with Manny, I woke with a strange calm. The kind that comes after pain has settled into purpose. For the first time in months, I knew what I had to do. They wanted a victim; instead, they were going to get a strategist. The first thing I did was lock down my life. I withdrew my name from every joint account and redirected all assets into a private trust under Ethan's name, something Linda couldn't legally touch. I called my lawyer and quietly updated my will, removing her entirely. I didn't leave a cent that could motivate her to finish what she'd started. Next, I made copies of everything: bank statements, voice recordings, photos. I kept the originals with Judge Lopez and handed duplicates to Manny for safekeeping. If anything happens to me, I told him, release it all to the police, and the press. He nodded, eyes hard. "Don't worry, old man. They won't see you coming." Over the next few days, I lived my life as if nothing had changed. I mowed the lawn, fixed the leaky faucet, kissed Linda's cheek goodnight. All the while, my cameras were rolling, tiny motion sensors hidden in corners of the kitchen, the garage, the hallway. I wanted to see what she did when she thought I wasn't looking. 3 nights later, the first footage came in. Linda and Clara met in our living room after midnight. They spoke in whispers, huddled close. "Clara, he's been quieter lately. Maybe he suspects." "Linda, he's always quiet. Old men brood, that's what they do." "Clara, and when are we doing it?" "Linda, soon." The insurance investigator gave us a window. Before the next review cycle. The calm I'd felt that morning hardened into ice. That same week, Ethan came home from his business trip. The moment he saw me, he frowned. "Dad, you look like you haven't slept in a month." I looked at him, the son I'd raised to trust the people around him, the man who still believed his wife and mother could do no wrong. I couldn't lie to him anymore. I sat him down in my study, turned on my laptop, and played the video. When the audio reached the part where Clara laughed about my pills, his face went pale. "Dad, this can't be real," he whispered. "Please tell me this isn't real." "It's real," I said quietly. "They've been stealing from us. And now, they're trying to end me." He buried his face in his hands. "Clara, my own wife." The silence that followed was heavier than any argument we'd ever had. Then, slowly, he lifted his head. "What do we do now?" I met his eyes. "We don't tell them we know. We let them think they've won. And when they make their move, we'll be ready. Together, we set the trap." That night, I took a small bottle of nitroglycerin pills, the ones Linda had tried to tamper with, and replaced them with harmless vitamin capsules. Then, using Manny's help, we staged what looked like a medical emergency. I collapsed in the kitchen after dinner, clutching my chest, gasping. Ethan panicked and called 911 while Linda hovered, frozen. I watched her closely, there was no shock in her eyes, only calculation. Clara arrived minutes later, trembling just enough to look convincing. At the hospital, I insisted on staying overnight for observation. Ethan and I pretended to argue about it in front of them. When they left, he stayed behind, pretending to go home, but instead, he met with Detective Flores, Lopez's contact. The officers planted discreet audio bugs in our house. The next evening, while I was resting at home, Linda called Clara. The recording captured everything. "Linda, it's too soon. He wasn't supposed to go like that yet. Clara, relax. He's old. It's believable. Linda, you don't understand. If they run toxicology, we're finished. Clara, then we move the money now, before they check the accounts." That was it. Proof of intent. When Ethan and the detective heard the recording, there was no doubt left. They advised patience, let the evidence pile higher before we moved. So, I waited, smiling at Linda across the breakfast table, pretending to forget the hospital scare. She kissed my forehead that morning, saying, "You gave me quite a fright." I smiled back. I'm sure I did. Inside, I was already counting down the days. Because soon, the woman who'd once promised to love me until death would finally meet the part of me that kept that promise literally. And this time, I wasn't going to be the one on the floor gasping for air. When the first plan failed, Linda's mask began to crack. She smiled a little too wide, talked a little too sweetly. Every question she asked carried a hint of testing. Was he suspicious? Did he know? I could feel her watching me at breakfast, waiting for me to slip. But I played my part well, soft-spoken, forgetful, half-distracted. The role of a harmless old man suited me. And then, as I feared, she made her next move. One Thursday morning, a pair of strangers arrived at my door. Both in suits, polite smiles that didn't reach their eyes. "Mr. Benton. We're from the County Health and Welfare Office. We received a report concerning your mental capacity and safety." Linda appeared behind them, perfectly composed, her voice filled with practiced concern. "Oh, thank goodness you came. My husband's been confused lately. Forgetting things, misplacing money. I'm afraid he's not himself." Her performance was flawless. I invited them in, calm and courteous, and answered every question they asked. When they requested access to my financials, I smiled faintly. "You'll find everything in order. But you may want to ask my accountant, Mr. Patel, about who's been making unauthorized withdrawals." The flicker of confusion on Linda's face was the first real crack in her performance. She hadn't expected me to have allies. The investigators thanked us both and promised to follow up. When they left, Linda turned to me, her voice sharp and cold. What did you tell them? I met her gaze evenly. Just the truth, Linda. Something you've clearly forgotten how to do. Her lips tightened. You're sick, Harold. Everyone can see it. You're paranoid, delusional. You need help. Maybe, I said quietly. But I'm not the one sleeping beside my son's wife. The color drained from her face. For the first time, she looked afraid. That night, she packed a bag. I heard drawers open, clothes rustle, a zipper slide shut. She moved around the room like a thief, careful not to make noise. I stayed in bed, eyes closed, pretending to sleep. At 1 a.m., the front door shut softly behind her. I called Manny. She's leaving. Probably heading to Clara's. He was already on it. I'll tail her. Keep your phone close. The next day, I got word from Detective Flores. Linda had filed a report claiming I'd grown violent, that I'd threatened her life. It was a desperate attempt to turn the tables before her lies collapsed. When officers came to check in later that afternoon, I was ready. I handed them my evidence binder, photos, recordings, forged documents, the insurance amendment, and copies of financial transfers. I told them calmly, if I wanted her gone, gentlemen, I wouldn't have documented her crimes for 3 months straight. The officers exchanged looks, muttered something about ongoing investigation, and left. The tide was turning. Meanwhile, Ethan confronted Clara. He told me later she broke instantly, crying, pleading, swearing Linda manipulated her. I didn't mean for it to go that far, she said. She promised me everything, money, freedom, a new life. He didn't respond. He simply handed her the voice recordings. Her tears stopped when she realized there was no way out. By the weekend, the detective had enough to move. Linda was staying in a motel across town. She must have felt cornered, because she called me one last time. Her voice was low, trembling with controlled fury. You've ruined everything, Harold. After all these years, you just couldn't die quietly. I let the silence hang, then said, no, Linda. I just learned how to live wisely. Click. Line dead. That was the last conversation we ever had outside a courtroom. The woman I'd built my life with had tried to destroy me with lies, but she forgot something fundamental. You can't gaslight a man who's already seen the truth with his own eyes. And when the truth finally reached the judge's bench, there would be nowhere left for her to hide. The courtroom was colder than I expected. The air conditioning hummed above us, steady and indifferent, as if it didn't care whose life was about to unravel. I sat at the plaintiff's table beside Judge Lopez, my advisor, my quiet anchor, and across from me, Linda sat between her attorney and Clara. They both looked immaculate. Composed. Confident. Clara's hair was perfectly tied back, Linda's pearl earrings catching the light as if to remind everyone she was still the picture of grace. But when Linda's eyes met mine, there was a flicker of something, fear, maybe. Or guilt trying to hide behind defiance. The judge entered, gavel striking once. Court is in session. Linda's lawyer started first. His tone was measured, rehearsed. Your Honor, this case is an unfortunate example of declining mental health in old age. Mr. Benton has exhibited signs of paranoia, delusion, and erratic behavior, going so far as to accuse his wife and daughter-in-law of attempted murder. We have evidence he's been under stress and unfit to manage his affairs. He turned toward me with a sympathetic smile that didn't reach his eyes. Mr. Benton, you've claimed your wife and daughter-in-law conspired to harm you. Do you understand how serious that accusation is? I met his gaze calmly. I do. Do you understand how serious it is to plan your husband's death? A murmur rippled through the courtroom. He raised a brow, smirking. Do you have proof of this alleged conspiracy? Lopez stood. We do, Your Honor. With the court's permission, we'd like to submit video and audio evidence obtained through private investigation. The judge nodded. Proceed. The lights dimmed slightly as Lopez queued up the footage. The screen flickered to life. The room fell silent. There they were, Linda and Clara, seated at that same hotel cafe, their voices clear and unmistakable. Clara, he takes those pills for his heart every morning, right? Linda, yes, but I can swap them. He wouldn't notice. Victor, don't get sloppy. The insurance has a contestability period. Make it look natural. Gasps filled the room. Linda's face drained of color. Her lawyer froze mid-note, pen hanging in the air. Lopez played the second clip, Linda and Clara whispering in our living room, planning that accident, in my workshop. Then came the phone recording of Linda after my staged collapse. It's too soon. He wasn't supposed to go like that yet. The silence afterward was heavy, suffocating. The kind that doesn't just end a defense, it buries it. Linda's lawyer stammered, this could have been fabricated. Lopez interrupted smoothly. The recordings have been authenticated by the County Forensic Audio Lab. Each timestamp matches location data from their cell phones. He held up the verification forms. Shall I submit them? The judge nodded grimly. I looked at Linda then. She wouldn't meet my eyes. Clara was already crying, trembling hands clutching the edge of the table. The facade had cracked completely. Finally, the judge spoke, voice low but cutting. Mrs. Benton, Mrs. Clara Benton, do either of you wish to respond before I call recess? Clara broke first. It was her idea, she cried, pointing at Linda. She said we'd both get what we wanted, money for me, freedom for her. I swear I never meant to hurt him. Linda's composure shattered. She turned on Clara, snarling, you're lying. You begged me to help you get the insurance, don't pretend you're innocent. The two of them shouted over each other, their voices echoing off the walls. The judge's gavel slammed down hard. Enough. Security moved closer. Ethan, sitting behind me, buried his face in his hands. I could see his shoulders shaking, grief, fury, disbelief all tangled together. When the courtroom finally quieted, the judge looked straight at Linda. Mrs. Benton, based on the evidence before me, you and your co-conspirator are hereby remanded into custody pending formal charges of attempted murder, insurance fraud, and forgery. This hearing is adjourned. The gavel struck again, sharp as a gunshot. Linda's expression shifted one last time, from rage to disbelief. She tried to stand, but an officer's hand pressed her back down. Harold, she whispered hoarsely. You set me up. I looked at her for what I knew would be the final time. No, Linda, I said quietly. You set yourself up the moment you mistook my love for blindness. They led her and Clara out in handcuffs. The crowd murmured, the press whispered, flashes went off near the doorway. When it was all over, I sat alone in the empty courtroom. The echo of the gavel still rang in my head, but so did another sound, the quiet relief of justice finally breathing. Ethan joined me a few minutes later. His eyes were red, his voice barely steady. Dad. I don't even know what to say. I put a hand on his shoulder. You don't have to. Just remember this, evil often wears a smile. And sometimes the people who say they love you are the ones sharpening the knife. He nodded, tears spilling freely now. I'm sorry you had to go through this. I looked toward the courtroom doors where Linda had vanished moments earlier. No, son, I said softly. I'm just sorry you had to see it. That day, the truth finally tore through the lies that had poisoned our home. Justice wasn't sweet, it was heavy, bitter, and final. But it was real. And for the first time in a long while, I could breathe again. 6 months have passed since that day in court, and my world has changed in ways I'm still trying to understand. The house feels larger now, emptier, but quieter in a way that brings peace instead of loneliness. The ghosts that used to haunt every room, the laughter, the lies, the cold glances, are finally gone. Linda and Clara were both convicted. The court found them guilty of conspiracy to commit murder and insurance fraud. Victor Lane, their so-called advisor, took a plea deal and turned over the rest of their paper trail, sealing their fate. They'll each serve over 20 years. I didn't attend the sentencing. Watching them destroy themselves once was enough. Ethan, though broken for a time, has started to heal. He sold the house he once shared with Clara and moved closer to me. Every Sunday, he brings his infant son, my first grandson, to visit. The boy has his mother's eyes, but there's innocence in them that softens the ache. When I hold him, I remember why I fought so hard to stay alive. I spend my mornings by the lake now, fishing alone with a thermos of coffee and the quiet hum of nature. Sometimes, I still hear Linda's voice in my head, the laughter, the lies, but it no longer hurts the way it used to. The truth has a strange way of cleansing pain, even when it leaves scars behind. People in town still talk about it. Some call it a tragedy, others a miracle that I survived. To me, it's neither. It's a lesson carved into the core of my being, a warning written in the fine print of every relationship. Trust, I've learned, is like glass. Once cracked, it doesn't matter how carefully you glue it back together, it will never be the same again. A few weeks ago, I received a letter from Linda. From prison. I didn't open it. I burned it in the fireplace and watched the paper curl into ash. Whatever she had to say, it came too late. The only closure I needed was the truth. Now, when I look out across the lake and feel the wind on my face, I know peace for the first time in years. The old me, the man who trusted too easily, is gone. What remains is someone sharper, quieter, but stronger. If you've made it this far, I want to thank you for listening to my story. It's not easy to share something so personal, but maybe my pain can serve as someone else's warning. If you appreciate real stories like this, stories that remind us to stay alert, to value honesty, and to never underestimate the darkness that can hide behind a smile, please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next one. Because in families like ours, the truth doesn't just set you free. Sometimes, it saves your life. Looking back now, I realize survival isn't always about strength, it's about clarity. The kind that only comes when everything you believed in shatters, and you're forced to see the world for what it really is. I used to think love was enough to protect a family. That decades of loyalty and shared memories could shield us from deceit. I was wrong. Love without vigilance becomes blindness, and blind trust can cost you everything. I've learned 3 lessons from all of this, truths I'll carry to my grave. First, love is proven by integrity, not words. People can say they love you while plotting your downfall. Watch what they do, not what they say. Second, protect your heart, but protect your assets even more. Evil doesn't always come kicking down the door, it can walk in with a smile, carrying dinner and saying, "I love you." Third, evil might win small battles, but truth, steady, patient truth, always wins the war. It just takes time and courage to let it unfold. I tell this story not for pity, but for warning. You can spend a lifetime building a home, only to learn too late that you were sharing it with someone sharpening a knife behind your back. So pay attention. Listen to the silences between words. Don't ignore the unease that creeps in when something doesn't add up. That feeling is your soul whispering, "Wake up." If you've ever faced betrayal, or fought your way through it, you already know, justice doesn't always come in a flash. Sometimes, it comes one painful truth at a time. I went to my daughter-in-law's that night thinking I was just dropping off a forgotten folder. Instead, I uncovered the darkness that had been festering in my own family. And I lived to tell you. Trust, but never blindly.